Hello and welcome to the Community Voice. I'm Fara Sax. Thank you so much for joining in today. Julie Cohen is the senior manager at the Jewish Fertility Foundation. She and the foundation provide emotional support, financial aid, and education for those navigating through fertility issues. Her work is driven both by her professional expertise and her own infertility journey and loss. Now a proud mom of 3, Julie lives in Birmingham, Alabama, and brings compassion and insight to the families she and JFF support. And she joins me here today. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
You just got off an airplane from Alabama.
Yes.
And we'll find out why you're here with us in Miami today. But
yes.
Let's talk about the Jewish Fertility Foundation and its mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So 10 years ago, Ilana Frank, our CEO and founder, she has 3 boys. And at the time, she had 2 of her boys, but she was living in Israel when she had them. And in Israel, IVF is free because of socialized medicine. So Ilana had her 2 boys and moved back to Atlanta, where she's from, and was blown away listening to people. I think it was at the JCC community, pool one day, talking about how expensive it was to try to grow their families through fertility treatments. So that gave Ilana the idea that there needed to be an organization that helps people on this journey. So JFF started in Atlanta. It then opened in Cincinnati. Birmingham, Alabama was the 3rd city, which is where I came in. And we now have 10 locations. And it is our mission to provide financial assistance, emotional support, and educational programming to individuals and couples who are experiencing infertility.
And on the research that I was doing, you're on your 10th anniversary as a foundation.
Yes. We just had a big party in Atlanta in January, but yes, 10 years of being open.
And talk to me about the fertility issues, who it affects, how this happens, how it unfolds, and the costs that are involved, because it is extremely expensive.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people think this is a new thing, but it's really that there was such stigma associated with infertility and loss that years ago people didn't talk about this. But currently, we know that infertility impacts 1 in 6 couples. And we've also found that it tends to be slightly higher in the Jewish community.
And what are the reasons for that?
Yeah, medical reasons. It can be female factor. A lot of people always assume it's the woman, but it can also be male factor. And in terms of why it's higher in the Jewish community, I think about, a lot of people pursue higher education and maybe older when they're trying to grow their families. And then we know that there is a subset of genetic diseases that are more prevalent in people with Jewish background.
And it's interesting because Ilana faced her own journey with this, but not only her, but you.
Yeah.
So if you would, our audience should know that you've walked the walk on this, not only working with the foundation, but your own journey to grow a family.
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband and I just celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. And we knew soon after getting married that we wanted to have a family. We had talked about that even before getting married. I had anticipated that it may be a little hard. I had a diagnosis of PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, and I thought, we'll just jump into treatment and it will all go smoothly. And, that's that. And we always talk about at JFF that, our whole lives we're taught, how not to get pregnant. We're not really taught a lot about, how fertility and, that you need to have these regular cycles and that there's this small window where you're most fertile. I mean, there's just so much fertility education that I know I never got. And so my first son, he is 8, and our journey to him was hard, but I didn't know that would be kind of the shorter, easier part of our journey. So since then, we have
a couple of pictures of them. I know you couldn't see them, but they're beautiful. And there's you and your beautiful husband.
Thank you. They weren't happy that I was leaving, but
But they'll live through.
They'll be just fine. 22 hours.
I was going to say 36 maybe. Maybe mommy didn't miss the plane.
I know, right? May miss that early flight tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we ended up, our twins, Gideon and Levi, our oldest is Asher. Gideon and Levi just turned 5.5 yesterday. We had to celebrate that half birthday.
Absolutely. It's
And
very big.
they were conceived via IVF. And so what I always say about my 3 boys, though, is that these boys are from 2 of 12 pregnancies that I had. So 10 losses along the way.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So when my oldest was born, we didn't have any losses before him. And I naively thought, like, if you have a baby with fertility treatment, that like, okay, you do the same thing again and it's going to work. And so with him, we had done IUI, which is called intrauterine insemination, not IVF. And
please clarify for an audience
yeah,
that might not know the difference.
Yeah. So there's all different treatments. People always think that it's just IVF. IVF is more invasive, but there are medications you can take that induce ovulation. And if you do those medications and do what's called an IUI, it's kind of what people think of as like the turkey baster method. But you go to the fertility clinic, they wash the sperm so that you have like the best sperm, the best chance. But the chances of IUI working are about 15 to 20%, which is similar to people getting pregnant each month during their fertile window. So not super high. He was our 5th IUI. And so after he was born and we decided we knew we wanted more kids, we continued that route. We had a couple of losses, and because we knew we wanted a big family, we jumped into IVF. And I thought, IVF's going to work the first time.
So what is that path to the IVF?
Yeah, so IVF involves an egg retrieval, which is you take ovulation stimulating hormones that stimulate your follicles to grow multiple eggs at a time. You undergo a minor procedure called an egg retrieval. You're sedated, and they're trying to grow as many eggs as possible kind of in sync with each other so that you have a better chance of those eggs fertilizing and growing and making it to the 5 or 6 day stage that they need to be to become an embryo.
And what does that mean to you, your body?
Yeah.
What is it? Are you treated with hormones on this?
Absolutely.
So you're a little more higher emotionally?
A little? My husband would probably say a lot.
But he's not listening.
Yes. Yeah. So, and let's back up a little, right? So I was working full time. And my other job is I'm a pediatric speech language pathologist, which I'm also super passionate about. And I was working in a school while going through treatment. So, you have these unpredictable appointments. You have the financial aspect of, even when you're not doing IVF and you're, doing IUI, the medications that you take to stimulate your hormones and grow your eggs. I mean, it's costly and not
costly.
Yeah. So IVF, we're going to go back to IVF. IUI, each IUI, it's going to depend on the clinic, maybe about $1,000, might be $1,500 plus the medication. But when you go into IVF, we're talking about the average price of a cycle is $20,000 for one cycle.
So one cycle is that you...
One egg retrieval.
Right.
And then one transfer.
And it may or may not work.
And you may or may not get viable embryos from your first egg retrieval.
And I was reading that 31 states do not cover this treatment.
Correct?
Okay, so we'll go back to that, but let's go back to your story.
Yeah, so almost all of it's out of pocket. For us, it was. And like I said, I went into IVF thinking like, okay, we've already had a baby, one egg retrieval, one transfer, it's going to work. And we ended up, our first egg retrieval, each egg retrieval is really a learning curve for the doctor, for your body, because everyone's body responds so differently. So because I have PCOS, we were extra conservative with that first egg retrieval, because if you what's called hyperstimulate the ovaries, if you do it too much and the hormones get too high, you can get very sick. And so we got 4 eggs from that first retrieval, which was very much on the lower side. We ended up with 2 embryos. Then you can genetically test your embryos, and we ended up with 1 viable embryo. And that transfer resulted in what's called a chemical pregnancy. So my labs were really good the first time. Hey, you're pregnant. 2 days later, you go for repeat labs, and it's you're not pregnant.
Mm.
I didn't even know what a chemical was. And now we were back at square one, having to go through another egg retrieval.
How did you and your husband get through, Mr. Cohen? How did you get through this time?
Yeah.
Because you've had 10 episodes and each story is completely different.
Yeah. You know, I think that infertility and loss either make or break you in your relationship. You know, I think you either grow closer and it strengthens your relationship, or the opposite. And I'm thankful that he and I have had a lot of support along the way, whether it's support from family or friends, or my amazing therapist who I love. But, you know, having that support is so important. But when we were going through this, JFF, we didn't know about JFF. JFF didn't exist where we lived. And I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only person going through this.
And then you had another pregnancy and another pregnancy. And tell me about the loss that was not viable for you and for your family.
You know, it's hard to think back to that first IVF loss, which would have been, I believe, our second loss. It was heartbreaking. And I think what was the most heartbreaking about it for me was I went into IVF thinking, okay, one egg retrieval, one transfer, living baby. And most of the time, that's not the case. And so we had just, invested all this money and time and energy into that IVF cycle. And after that loss, we had nothing left. We had no embryos left. Like if we wanted to try again, we needed to start over with another egg retrieval.
So how do you move forward, and how does the JFF help families?
Yeah, so I always say that I wish JFF was around when we started our journey. And to rewind a little, when we started our journey and we were trying to get pregnant with our first, and he's 8, so this was 9 years ago. So, we know now, social media, people talk about infertility. There's accounts, there's infertility influencers, there's all these resources out there. But 9 years ago, there weren't. And I got so tired of putting on this fake face everywhere we went that I made the decision to make a Facebook and Instagram post with an article basically about why am I not supposed to tell you that we're struggling to get pregnant? And this was before anyone talked about it. And I remember a couple people that I gave a heads up to saying you're going to post what? And I said, yeah, I can't keep this a secret anymore.
So what is the taboo about that? Why we need to demystify it, bring it out?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. A lot of people have guilt. From a young age, we are told, the women have babies, you get married, you have babies.
Lollipops and rainbows.
Yes.
Cinderella.
I was just going to say the fairy tales, right?
But you know how that ended for those poor girls.
Yeah, the fairy tale, everyone's going to have this happy ending. And it's interesting because male factor infertility has the same taboo. And I would say male factor is talked about less. Men are a lot of men I've spoken with, if it's male factor, meaning that it's their sperm that's causing the infertility, they don't want that out there. They don't want their male friends.
Less manly.
Yeah, thinking that their sperm aren't good or aren't strong. So I think just a lot of embarrassment. And I think a lot of, before I posted about it, I thought I was the only one. So a lot of times you don't want to share something if you think that you're the only one going through it. And what blew me away was when I made that post, my inbox flooded with messages of people in my own community who I just saw this perfect family with 3 beautiful kids, and then got a Facebook message, all 3 of my kids were IVF.
So if a child is IVF, is it carried by the mother?
Yes.
Or there's no surrogacy?
Well, right. So IVF actually can be either. So IVF, if you're doing IVF, there's a few different things. So with us, it was my eggs and my husband's sperm, and it was our embryo that was fully genetically ours, and it was my uterus that carried. There's also, and this is what I love about working for JFF, because I didn't know about any of this until I took this job. There's also what are called donor gametes. So if
donor
gametes, meaning donor sperm or donor eggs.
So this is an anonymous?
It can be or it cannot be. It depends. There's times where people know who their egg donor is or their sperm donor, or it could be anonymous. You know, it's interesting because these days with stuff like 23andMe, a lot of stuff is less anonymous than it used to be, even if someone wants it to be. But if a woman is struggling with egg quality and not having success with her own eggs, there's times where she may turn to, like I said, donor eggs using someone else's egg. If it's male factor, or if it's a female-female relationship or single mother by choice, then they may use donor sperm. And there's also donor embryos. So there's something called embryo adoption, where people who have embryos that they're done with IVF and they have these leftover embryos, and you get to decide what you do with your embryos. And some people decide to use them for embryo adoption, where another couple or another woman would carry that embryo in her uterus. So it wouldn't be genetically, like the genetic makeup wouldn't be there, but it's her child. She would deliver the baby and raise the baby.
How fascinating, and so much information I didn't know personally, but that's why I have guests on to help educate me and the audience.
Yeah.
We have a video that I want to share of just some beautiful stories, some beautiful people that have benefited by your foundation, the Jewish Fertility Foundation. And Rachel, whenever you're ready, we are ready to roll it.
We talked.
We salsa danced in the living room.
We did salsa dance in the living room. We started planning for the wedding as I was finishing grad school. We wanted to have how many children?
I think I wanted 6 at the time.
Both of us were excited about that idea.
Right. Literally, I thought it was going to take like no time at all.
We thought we would have a baby and then we'd have another baby and it would be fine. And it wasn't.
It was very, very difficult.
Okay, when are you gonna have children and when are you gonna have kids?
Be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
The Jewish way. When you realize that it's unexplained, you don't even know what you're fighting.
This vicious cycle, I guess, of hope and disillusion. Sometimes infertility is a little inexplicable.
People just don't know or understand the feelings and emotions around infertility.
You didn't know how much you could emotionally take. We're going to get punched again and punched again.
It's such a feeling of disappointment and inadequacy, and that's just how you feel about your body. Then, of course, there's how it affects your relationship with your spouse.
You feel stuck and like you're being separated from the entire Jewish community.
An IVF cycle with medication, with genetic testing, could be over $20,000.
That's a huge, huge, huge strain.
If you don't experience it, you don't understand how difficult it is.
JFF opened their community to us.
We can help. We have resources.
Beyond the money, what it represents, which is that you have a support system.
The Fertility Buddy program. You get connected with somebody who's gone through similar challenges.
The buddy program and the support groups is the most important thing that we bring to the community.
We train the medical community around needs of Jewish clients.
Having an outlet, things that I would be saying to her, that she would be saying to me, verified by other people.
I don't feel alone anymore. I have JFF.
I know how painful this is, and there's hope.
From the infertility, the drugs, the multiple surgeries, then the birth, to be blessed with such an awesome little kid.
He's totally chill, he's sweet as can be, and so cute.
And so cute.
It just makes our hearts so full that we have these 2 adorable, sweet, kind little people.
Hi, bud. You see Daddy.
You can't imagine your life without your children once they come. And it's, life-changing is what I would describe it as.
You will be happy that you reached out to JFF.
We're a family-oriented tradition. When somebody in this community is suffering with infertility, a lot of people suffer with them.
Together as a community, we can make the dream of Jewish children a reality. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your support.
Just beautiful. What a gift. What a gift for a family to grow.
And that video, I get teary every time I see it. It really shows the purpose of JFF is really to support people.
Talk about that. Talk about that support. How do you support? And probably in Alana's dreams, she thought, okay, I can make a difference, but probably she had no idea the gravity of that, what that was going to do and how that was going to impact so many beautiful stories, children, families, individuals, communities grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have various ways that we support. One way, like I mentioned before, are financial grants. But I always say, yes, the finances are so important and you need money to be able to do treatment. But to me, the emotional support that we provide is even, more valuable. So we have free support groups. We have city-specific support groups, and then we also have national support groups. So the city-specific ones, in some cities they're in person, in some cities we've kept them virtual. I know in Birmingham we've kept it virtual because similar to Miami, we're a very small city, so that's not similar to Miami, but we do have clients, from all over Alabama that might be getting treated in Birmingham. So just like in Miami where people are spread out, by having a virtual support group, it takes away that barrier of distance. So we have our support groups, and I know, in Birmingham and in other cities, the women from support groups become friends. I've had stories back home where these women have run into each other at their clinic getting lab work, and they maybe never met in person before, but recognize each other's faces and know each other from virtual support group. We also have expanded our national support group. So we have more specific ones like male peer-to-peer, because we know often the males feel like they're forgotten in that support piece and along the journey. We have a surrogacy support group. We have LGBTQ. We recently had one that was specific to some of the federal workers that were laid off in DC because some of them, had fertility coverage or had salaries that were going to help pay for that treatment. So lots of different support groups. We also have what's called a fertility buddy program, which is also, one of my favorite resources. So we have people that go through a really brief training who have already been through infertility, and then we have people who are actively experiencing it apply for a buddy. And we try to pair you with someone who has a similar journey that's on the other side.
Isn't that wonderful? It does take a village. It does take a community. It does take a state. It does take a nation. And what a wonderful opportunity. But who's eligible to be part of the foundation programs? And how can they apply if they are struggling with fertility issues?
Yeah, so our financial grants are exclusive to the Jewish community. Our donors want more Jewish babies, and they ask that one of the individuals, if it's a couple or if it's a single mom or single dad by choice, be Jewish, and we ask in the application that you're raising your child Jewish.
It's Jewish Fertility Foundation.org. You'll see it on the bottom screen running a couple of times during the interview. And if you need more information.
But it's so important for me to emphasize that all of our other services, emotional support, education, our services are open to anyone. And so a lot of times people will say, oh, but it's a Jewish organization. We are here to help anyone and everyone that needs it. We always say infertility is the worst club with the best members. We hate that you're in the club. Whenever I have to call a client, for an initial intake, I always say, I hate that you need us, but I'm thankful you found us.
100%. And let's talk a little bit about the fertility treatments and their expense. And they are so expensive, as you just started with the interview and some of my research. How does the foundation help alleviate some of this financial burden?
Yeah, so our financial grants are up to $10,000. We have a committee that blindly looks at the application, meaning they don't know who you are when you're applying. And they have, a calculator that they use that looks at, not just your financial status, but also, your doctor fills out a form that gives information about, your chances of getting pregnant, your chances of carrying a pregnancy. And so we have grants that range from $1,000 to $10,000. And in most of our cities, so I forgot to mention that you do need to be in one of those 10 locations.
What are the 10 cities?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot here.
Give me the ones that you remember.
Let's see if I can remember all of them. So we've got Atlanta, Cincinnati, Birmingham, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Greater DC, South Florida, Detroit. We just opened a virtual model in Nevada. And whatever the one city I'm forgetting is I'm never gonna hear the end of it, right?
Don't worry about it. I put you on the spot, but you did really good. I gave you a 99% on your test today. But that's great. So you're here for a mission.
Yeah.
Tonight you are not only enjoying time with me today, but tonight something very, very, very important is happening in our community that brings you down here. Tell our audience what's going on.
Denver's the other city.
Oh my God. I am going to be able to sleep tonight.
My type A personality was not going to be able to move forward.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm sorry. Good. I'm glad.
But don't ask me to repeat it.
Yeah.
So what's going on tonight? Very, very important.
Yeah. So I know you might be wondering, or listeners might be wondering, like, why is she here from Alabama? So tonight, we received a grant from the National Council for Jewish Women. We had a similar program in Atlanta, and we received a grant here as well, where we are having a panel of experts talk about reproductive advocacy. And so we will be hearing tonight from reproductive attorneys, a reproductive endocrinologist, a representative from the National Council for Jewish Women, and myself, and I will be moderating the panel. I will be speaking, moderating it from a professional standpoint, but also a personal standpoint, in that along my decade-long journey, and all those losses and everything, my husband and I were directly impacted, just kind of in unique ways that I like to go and share my story. And so I'm so thankful that I have the privilege to be here today, to talk with you and also lead this important, impactful event tonight.
Talk about that in specific. What happened in Atlanta's Supreme Court recently that could
Alabama.
Oh, sorry. What did I say?
Atlanta. That's okay.
It's one of their 10 locations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
What happened in Alabama that could affect Florida and that people that are receiving fertility treatment, thinking about it, how could that impact their treatment course?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few different ways. One is, like you said, a year and a half ago, I can't believe it's been that long, in Alabama, the Alabama Supreme Court made a ruling that gave embryos personhood, meaning that an embryo that's outside of a uterus, in a petri dish or in a freezer, basically said that, that has person rights. And as a result, IVF clinics in Alabama immediately shut down because there was a lot of unknown. If an embryo is a person and you have an unsuccessful embryo transfer, is that murder? The embryologists that, delicately work in their labs with these embryos after an egg retrieval, not every egg fertilizes, not every embryo is viable, is that murder if the embryo isn't viable? Basically, clinics did not know what to do, and legal, told them, we can't be open until we get more guidance. So I had clients, I'll never forget, who texted me and said, hey, Julie, I think IVF is going to shut down tomorrow at my clinic. And I remember saying, IVF isn't shutting down, relax. The next day, they called me and IVF was shutting down. And two clients in particular were literally one of them was about to start medication for her egg retrieval the next day. Through an incredible grant from the National Council for Jewish Women, we got emergency funding, and we were able to provide 2 grants to women in Birmingham who ended up traveling to Atlanta for their treatment. It's about 2.5 hours away. Through JFF, we had the connections with the doctors, and, they didn't want to wait because we didn't know how long IVF was going to be shut down for. So these 2 women, moved their treatment to Alabama, and I think of just the emotional and physical toll that fertility treatments already have, and then to get a phone call one night and say, oh, sorry, you can't do that anymore. So these 2 women, they traveled for treatment, and actually I have permission to share that in the last month, a couple weeks apart, they each gave birth to healthy baby girls.
Wow. So where are we now? Because of this, the emergency funding.
Yeah.
Grants, but long term, what does that mean for couples, individuals trying to raise and grow a family?
I wish I knew. And I think, the reproductive attorneys and some of those specialists are better able to talk than I am. But what I can say is, people think what happened in Alabama was such a 1 in a million. That's never going to happen here in Miami. That's never going to happen here in insert your city. But the reality is that in addition to what happened to Alabama, there have been many states that have tried to pass similar legislature that have gotten close. And even our fix in Alabama, we kind of call it a Band-Aid, is not great legislature. And we know it's not going to stand its ground for forever. And that right now in Alabama, we need a state constitutional amendment to really protect IVF. And we're far from that.
People want to get involved. People want to help in the cause. What do they need to do today, Julie?
Absolutely. So one, reach out to JFF. Go to our website. Obviously, I'll put a shameless plug in here to donate. We need funds to provide grants and provide free support groups and provide educational programs like tonight. But even if you don't have money to donate, if you have been through infertility, go to our website and sign up to be a veteran for our Fertility Buddy program. People who are involved and know their legislators, write to them, reach out to them. We at JFF, we are not an advocacy organization. We are not a political organization at all. But we do strongly believe that education is a form of advocacy. And so much of what has gone around everywhere is due to lack of education. People, some of these legislators, when these laws were being passed, there are people out there who think, everyone's goal is to create 30 embryos and everybody gets that many and your doctor makes you get 100 eggs. I mean, none of that's true. And so ask questions, reach out to the people who can give you the facts and the information, and please get involved in JFF because we're always looking for more support. And a lot of local people, or mostly local people, are watching this, and we have a JFF chapter, a physical chapter here in South Florida. Efrat is our manager here, so it's not me since I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, but she's
not Atlanta,
but she is incredible, and we have so many ways for you to get involved.
Go on the website. It's jewishfertilityfoundation.org. I look forward to hearing more wonderful things and how your journey impacts others' journeys, who builds a community, who makes the world a better place to be. Thank you so much for being here and for coming all the way from Alabama. And I appreciate your time here with me today.
Thank you for having me, because opportunities like this, to spread the word and give, factual information about our organization and our mission and infertility is just a great way, to spread awareness and reduce that stigma. So thank you again.
JewishFertilityFoundation.org. And thank you for joining me and hoping some of this information will make a difference in your life. Until next time, I'm Fara Sax. Have a great day. And remember, take care of yourselves and each other.